Hey everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. All right, we're gonna get started. So if you wanna come back to your seats, get some last minute snacks, go ahead. So good evening, assalamu alaikum, and welcome. Thanks for braving the cold and the snow to join us here today. I go by Khalid and my pronouns are they, them. I'm an artist, I'm a writer and organizer, and I also have the unfortunate honor of being a medical student. But today I come to you as a queer brown Muslim. In many ways, the crisis in Palestine brings so many of these identities and topics together. I've been interested in the gender racialization of brown men for a long time now. And this becomes most apparent to me and Mariam in the art spaces, but certainly we can see it in so many other fields and other domains. And while we explore this topic, we do so with Palestine at the front of the mind, although many other ethnicities from the Swanasa region also experience this kind of characterization. But we want to center Palestine in this moment, and it can certainly be applied to other ethnicities. So Palestine teaches us, and hopefully tonight we will teach and learn alongside you. Now, Mariam, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Miriam. I'm an Egyptian Nicaraguan designer and illustrator. I'm not a medical student, but I've also been very in-depth about these topics with like close and family friends. And you know, when you're in an art space, you really realize what depictions can actually cause and like the power that media has on the perceptions of a people. So it's really good that we are like coming together to learn more about how this happens and why it happens.
Okay, so with that, we'll give a bit of an introduction as to Art Mubarak and the start of Art Mubarak. So Art Mubarak is an annual hashtag event held mostly on Twitter. And this started in 2020 by two queer Muslim Bangladeshis, myself one of them, Shazleen, in London. And it is born from a desire to connect with other Muslim creatives and establish a readily accessible breadth of work for recruiters to find Muslim artistic talent. So something that we center annually in our event is that we remind people participating in the event that this is for all Muslims. This includes LGBTQ Muslims, Black and Indigenous Muslims, Muslims who practice differently or outside of an institution, and we especially want to center Muslims from the global South. So in this, basically what we do, is it changing? Okay, great. Is we have this hashtag event on Twitter, and it's been featured on different news outlets like the Middle Eastern Eye. And basically, we have the annual event on Twitter, and we also, with that event, promote a opt-in server. So, or not a server, a database of Muslim creatives. So, but everything is opt-in, all the demographic information. So if you don't want to respond to a certain thing like, you know, gender identity or a particularity of your ethnicity, that's totally okay. We basically set up this resource to email out industry opportunities that we see on social media to whichever ethnic, specific ethnicity is looking for it. So sometimes there will be a call, I'm looking for a South Asian illustrator, send me a portfolio. That would be something that we send out to the group. And the second component of Art Mubarak is hosting these kinds of political education seminars. So Mariam and I held a seminar online, on Twitter Spaces actually, on art and Orientalism. So we want to continue to have these discussions about identifying Orientalism, racism, other forms of discrimination in art and in our culture and in our media. So now we interrogate the framework, the perfect victim. So the women and children terminology was created by Cynthia Enloe, who is a political theorist and feminist. And basically, this designation partitions groups into naive innocents, that is the women and children category, and men and boys. So when we explore women and children, they are automatically given this default perfect victimhood, and they're requiring white saviorism. So the white man or the white person has to save the women and children from the oppressive brown man. Whereas on the other hand, with men and boys, they are automatically assumed guilty. This quote from Achille Mbembe says, "Whether or not he bears arms, the enemy to be punished is an intrinsic enemy, an enemy by nature." So it is simply the nature of brown man to be violent, be dangerous, and that's basically what this partitioning of the women and children versus men and boys creates. It creates categories of people based off gender, and both serve to dehumanize these people. So whether you are the innocent in need of saving, it robs the autonomy of women and children, or you could be the implied male, implied militant, already dangerous. And this framing, in particular in Palestine, assumes that Palestinian men are less worthy of life, that it is not also a horror to slaughter our brothers and fathers and husbands. So we want to ask, what is it about masculinity in the Muslim brown man that makes him so threatening? And we wanted this to be a bit of an interactive portion, so if you want to shout out adjectives, stereotypes, caricatures, and I'll just repeat them so that the live stream can hear as well.
It's okay, we won't get mad.
Terrorist, okay. Anything else? Sorry? Rapist? Okay. Misogynistic. Sorry, what was that?
Backwards.
Oh, backwards, I see. Okay, backwards, yeah. Yeah, exactly. And like these just come immediately to mind, and they permeate all aspects of our society, whether it's in the news or in the media, the entertainment that we consume. And we want to highlight this quote from Edward Said, which describes Orientalism taking on a chameleon-like quality. So Orientalism serves the purpose of the Orientalist, the person who carries out Orientalism, and it can contradict itself, it can change at any moment because it's a chameleon form, and it serves to dehumanize brown men. So as we go through each of these characterizations, we ask, what purpose does this particular caricature serve the West, and how does it function in media and state policy? So as a forewarning, we'll be going through some sensitive or uncomfortable or disturbing material, so if at any point you need to step away, take a breather, use the restroom, please feel free to do so. There's definitely a lot of heavy topics we'll be going through today.
Okay, so one of the first kind of traits that is put upon the brown man by the Western media is savage, barbaric, and animalistic. Now, a lot of the time, whenever they are describing these people as animals, it is vermin, rodents, things to be, exterminated. It is a mass dehumanization of Palestinian men, and these caricatures can be seen throughout history, like to whoever, the West deems to be their enemy, whether it be the Japanese or Black people or indigenous people or Jewish people. These are common character types that are assigned to them in order to justify their dehumanization. And it just serves as like a reminder that these people are uncivilized, that, we're actually doing a good thing by going to these Middle Eastern countries and, killing everybody, because, we are the civilized ones. We are the moral high ground here. So we must civilize everyone else. It is like a time and time again used tactic by Western imperialists to just justify, taking everything from Middle Eastern lands because, they're uncivilized. They don't know what to do with it. They're incompetent. They don't know what to do with all the money and the materials they have. And if you give a roach $1, what are they gonna do with it? So it's just a way to take away agency from the brown man.
Basically calling them animals, like what was said by the Israeli defense minister, it renders brown men as subhuman, and not granting them a humanity means that you don't have to treat them as human, and it subjects them to all sorts of violence.
Now we have another character type, sexist, oppressive, and conservative, especially in regards to the Western hemisphere.
We'll play this video and then we'll discuss the character trait.
So you don't approve of...
And do you think that Israel is a democratic country?
I know that Israel is a democracy. They have elections.
No, this man is now, has 4 courts against him because of 4 cases of corruption. This man knows if the war stops,
we haven't got time to do the entire history of Benjamin Netanyahu, who is not a popular figure in Israel. I'm not here to defend Benjamin Netanyahu. Mustafa, it's impossible to...
Whenever I speak about Palestinian rights or Palestinian situation, you claim it is history. I'm talking about what's happening today.
No, I know, and
this is not history.
Can we just... You talked about how you don't want Israel, you're saying Israel, that October the 7th happened, you're placing that in historical context. I understand that. Please don't say that again. We don't have time for it. You've made that point 5 times already.
I don't know what you have time for.
Oh my God, for the love of God, let me finish a sentence, man. Maybe you're not used to women talking. I don't know, but I'd like to finish a sentence, sir. Anyway. So,
no, you are misleading the public now by claiming
right, I've got 20 seconds left. I'm not even going to bother trying to answer. If you don't think Israel's reaction is acceptable, what would have been an acceptable reaction to you? You've got 10 seconds left.
To end occupation and allow peace to prevail for both people.
That's their reaction. Brilliant. Yeah. Sorry to have been a woman speaking to you, but there you are. Doctor.
Yeah, so a lot of the time, Western media outlets will portray brown people as more conservative, as many of you know. And it is, as I said in the past slide, that it is to keep the U.S. in a moral high ground. So anything that the U.S. does in the end will be righteous because, in the Middle East, women don't have rights, or so they say. But, there is no actual grounds to prove that everybody in the Middle East is conservative, or that they treat them the way that the United States would say that they are treated. And this is often used as a kind of counterpoint or a strawman argument in order to deflect Palestinian voices. What is your main goal here? You just care about your conservatism and your, oppressive and sexist nature. Why isn't Israel justified? And it just places them in a kind of frustrating circle in order to try and show that they're actually kind of asking for help and trying to find a way to call for a ceasefire peacefully, but are constantly being thrown the conservative and oppressive stereotype at them whenever they do speak. So.
And it's not that America and the West is not also sexist. We have, in the last year or 2 years alone, we've had sweeping anti-trans and anti-gay legislation. So does that not make us also oppressive and backwards? Things like sexism are not exclusive to brown populations. It comes up in all sorts of societies, but somehow there's a double standard, and brown men are called sexist and oppressive when we see it play out in white society as well.
Now, this is actually where we get to, oh, it didn't go. Please. Okay, there we go. And here we actually see where a lot of the media that is being put out there is targeting, a Christian U.S. audience. When you look at the first picture, you see kind of like devil imagery, which is to contrast with, the good, holy hero of the USA, versus the evil Middle Eastern devil. It frames them as wholly evil in their plans. There is no gray ground right here. It is just a black and white situation. Also kind of pointing out that no matter what, it's just there is no actual real reason why they're doing this. It's just because they're evil. There's no actual nuance, and Israel's right to bomb back or completely decimate the population because they're evil anyway. And the U.S. is always right because they're so holy and they're so Christian. And other people in the Middle East aren't meant to see these images. These are solely for the white U.S. American to indulge in and to reiterate in their beliefs and keep it just in their hearts whenever they see any Palestinian suffering.
And another thing that you accurately noted in our discussions as we were working on this is the fact that by painting the Middle East or by painting the brown man as a villain, it implies that the U.S. takes on a superhero status. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the superhero story.
Yeah, so if you remember during the Iraq Wars, there was a sudden surge of superhero movies coming onto this scene. The first superhero movie, Iron Man in the big Avengers series, literally starts with him in the Middle East, being attacked by terrorists, even though he's a weapons manufacturer. And honestly, I don't know why he was the victim in that scenario. But ever since then, it has been a kind of propaganda after propaganda piece that has been continually spit out by Hollywood in order to, emphasize just how, the United States is heroic, that we always do the good and right thing. And I don't know if many of you know, but in order for, Hollywood to use military sets in their movies, they must get approval by the U.S. military first. So, and this goes to cops as well. You can't say anything bad about the U.S. military or the U.S. government when you are using their military sets or borrowing military people to put in your movie. So it is definitely just targeted propaganda. And if you think about how the United States' #1 export is military defense objects, and the second biggest export is entertainment, you see how these two things go hand in hand. Okay. Corrupt, scammer, and trickster. Now, we're all familiar with the oil baron, billionaire Arab stereotype that is pervasive in a lot of media, especially with shows like Dubai Bling and stuff like that. But this is a very, intentional way that it is brought upon Western audiences. It actually serves to, always discredit these brown people whenever they do call for help. When you look at, Hamas trying to sell his son's decapitated head for $10,000, or the Hamas heads being at these resorts while everyone else is dying, it actually just makes it harder for actual Palestinians to be believed by outsiders, even while they are filming their deaths on camera. So if you remember Biden, when he stated that he had no faith in the Gaza Ministry death tolls, and whenever people would actually combat the rumors after October 7th, they weren't believed, even though they were actually, discredited by the Israeli journalists at that time as well. It is just a current idea that all the time these people are always lying, that you have to give so much proof in order to show that you're suffering, that it is in Pallywood that is often thrown around the Twitter circuits or social media circuits, that unless they see you bleeding right in front of them, they'll just think you're lying, and especially with brown men who are at the forefront of these, savings from the rubble and the surgeries on kids without anesthesia, they are just thrown to the wolves because, they're obviously lying because, we know the Arab to be a scammer and trickster. So it's very intentional that they are framed this way.
Thrown to the wolves and also called wolves. So brown men are also designated as terrorist. Here we have a photograph of a news headline in Berlin that says 9,000 dead Hamas terrorists, when they're actually referring to male civilians. So these male civilians in Palestine were automatically called terrorists because they were simply brown men. And this has certainly, the definition of terrorist has certainly been facilitated with in the aftermath of September 11th. And it enables so many more people to be ensnared in the definition of terrorists. So it can be literally Middle Eastern, Arab, or Muslims. Those are the people most commonly called terrorists, but it's also terrorist lookalikes, or people who inhabit these terrorist-like bodies. So people like Sikhs, Hindus are also captured into this definition of terrorist. And in labeling them as terrorists, they lose their citizenship and they lose their rights, either literally or metaphorically, as we'll go on to explore as well, wherein things like the law and can't protect them. So they don't get due process. They're not given the benefit of the doubt. They're just automatically assumed as guilty. And this very nebulous definition of terrorist also allows for them to be subject to violence outside of and above the law, because the common statement goes, there's no negotiating with terrorists. There's no diplomacy with terrorists. There's no nonviolent means of interacting with terrorists. They can only be met with violence. So this kind of extra military, or operating outside of the law, is what is enabled when a brown man who is just a regular civilian is given this label of terrorist. I wanted to also mention that the Yemeni Houthis, who were taken off of the list of terrorist organizations in 2021, were recently put back onto the list after their direct action in blockading the Red Sea and blockading any ships going to Israel. So this, it's very random the way that they decide who is and isn't a terrorist. So if you threaten the American status quo, then you could also be labeled as a terrorist and then be subject to this violence outside of the law.
See also Nelson Mandela being called a terrorist and Martin Luther King being called a terrorist in their respective times. And it's just a common, just like archetype that is just thrown on anyone who talks back against Western imperialism.
And I also want to mention, recently it's the death anniversary of Tortuguita, who is an activist in the Stop Cop City movement, and they were also labeled terrorist by the state. So this definition can be applied to anyone and everyone if you challenge the American elite. So the idea of hypersexual now brings into play the position of the white woman. So here we have Barry Weiss, our favorite, right wing, saying, "I saw this beautiful woman being gang raped by these fighters," and then she ends with savages, and then there's a second tweet here with like a cartoon showing so many of these hostages have been raped and come back pregnant. So it basically places the white woman in a status of purity and innocence in need of protection from the dangerous brown man. And throughout this presentation, and certainly for this slide, we want to challenge and resist contemporary or Western feminist discourse that universalizes masculinity as bad, like man equals good, woman equals bad, when we know things are more complicated than that, with intersectionality of race, gender, so many other components. And this flattening of the patriarchy also denies the humanity of colonized and racialized men. And it actually positions men of color as more threatening to women, both white and women of color, than white women are to men and women of color. So in creating this narrative of Western feminism and saying, man equals good, man equals bad, woman equals good, it flattens the patriarchy into something in which brown man can cause violence to white women, but white women cannot enact violence on brown men. So one of these forms of violence is this hypersexuality and this fear that the brown man might contaminate the white nation. So here we explore the kind of contradictory yet simultaneously true idea of the hypermasculine brown man versus the effeminate or emasculated brown man. We couldn't find examples specifically to Palestine in this moment, but it is something that comes up recurrently in that the brown man is both hypermasculine and predatory and abusive and things like that, but the brown man's masculinity can never supersede the white man's masculinity. It's always in relation to the white man who has the ultimate masculinity. So in calling back Edward Said's concept of the chameleon-like Orientalism, we can see that whenever convenient, the brown man is can be effeminate and asexual and castrated, but when also convenient, they can become the predator and sex fiend. In particular, the emasculation, it not only removes the brown man's ability to continue their own population, but it also removes their ability to, or rather, so if they are not masculine, then they can't continue their population. But it also positions them as a threat to the white nation, so that contamination I was describing earlier.
Okay, time to beat up your favorite Disney movie. So we recognize that this is a fictional movie, but this is a great embodiment of all the tropes that we've seen and like the tropes that we have yet to see. It's just a great example of like Orientalist like BS in the Western media that has been pervasive and like has been like commented on since its released in 1992, which happened to be right after the Gulf Wars. So it was worked on when the Gulf Wars were in present time. Okay.
And we also want to use this as an example to work through the caricatures. We've outlined these different caricatures, and we can use this fictional example to recognize it in media, but in practicing with this, it trains us to think more critically about the news and the entertainment we consume. But we recognize that Agrabah is not Palestine.
Okay. So when we begin the movie, or we are presented in the introduction of the movie, we are met with the song, Arabian Nights. Oh, I come from a land from a faraway place where the caravan camels roam, where they'll cut off your ear if they don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hates home. Now, this lyric was changed later, but it's still, like around that time especially, gives you the first impression of like what you're going to go into, what this world is going to be like, what the setting is going to be like, who the people are going to be like. So, we move on to the introduction of our hero, who is commonly referred to as a street rat. He is stealing things in the first 5 minutes of the movie, but he is still a hero. So he has Western features and speaks with American elocution, but he is still brown. So we can't make him too noble. We have to put him, because all Arab people are thieves apparently to the Western media, and then we want to juxtapose this against the people who are seen as villains in the movie, or antagonists, or just minor grunts. They are all closer in appearance to the stereotypical Arab, and they often are exhibiting portrayed behaviors of the brown man, being lecherous, sexual, barbaric, abusive. There are multiple times in the movie that they attack the female love interest, Jasmine, who is, again, this woman victim, innocent, the oppressed. And when we see this multiple times in the film, it just cements it in the mind that this is how it is. It may be fiction, but it still has its impact. And the only time that these people are defeated is by the white savior, or the closest thing to a white savior, which is Aladdin, who was modeled after Tom Cruise whenever they were designing his character. And also one more note that Jafar and other Disney villains have been queer-coded in the past. So going back to the, effeminate Arab and the villainous Arab, he's the amalgam of both, so.
And we can also see the extremes of what was being described earlier, the hypermasculine versus the emasculated, with Jafar being emasculated and the grunts in the lower images being more of the hypermasculine trope. So within the women and children framework that we explored earlier, brown boys are actually not protected within this category of women and children. So brown boys, they experience something called unchilding, which is the dehumanization and confiscation of childhood from Palestinian children, but in particular with Palestinian boys. They're cast as militants to legitimize their slaughter alongside their adult counterparts. So when an IOF soldier kills a Palestinian boy, it's because that boy is going to grow up and join Hamas, so might as well kill him now. In this way, Palestinian boys are not afforded any kind of childhood, any kind of innocence, and to also, they're also designated, militants. So this idea of the military-age male arose around the Bush era, and it's defined by the state as any and all boys and men, including civilians who are ages 16 and older. So this labeling as the military-age male becomes interchangeable with combatant, even though we know that a civilian is not a combatant, and certainly not a 16-year-old boy who is a civilian is not a combatant. But they create these false equivalencies to justify more slaughter and to abduct this innocence from Palestinian boys. And I want to bring up a quote from a Muhammad al-Kurd poem in which he says, in the piece, "A Boy Sells Gum at Columbia," he writes, "The boy is 8, which is 22 for Americans." So he very starkly shows the difference between this 8-year-old boy who is just a full-grown 22-year-old adult to Americans. So we've been exploring a lot of these caricatures, these kind of racist depictions of brown men, not to platform them, because it is not our interest to argue with racists about brown men and brown boys. We know that we will not ever be able to reconstruct their racist imaginations. But, and it would also mean that we're attempting to prove our humanity to those who are trying to extinct us. So, but we explore these caricatures to examine what function does it serve in the Western narrative. In manufacturing consent for genocide, that is the production of stories to enable violence or to disable empathy, how can we as critical thinkers see through the lies and continue to assert that Palestinian and brown men are deserving of love and of life? And to kind of go through some of these pictures, the first one is of Khaled and Reem Naban, and he, in an interview with him, he said that his granddaughter was the soul of his soul, and we see him cradling her corpse and, showing her so much love. And the second photo is of a group of Palestinian children who rescued a cat as they were escaping an airstrike. The third image is of Dr. Hani Al-Haytham, who is the ER director of Al-Shifa Hospital. And he's cradling a newborn who was rescued from the rubble. And he was martyred on December 18th, 2023. And the final image is footage from Gaza in which they pull a little girl out of the rubble, and she says, "Oh, am I dead? Like, is this a graveyard?" And then the man who's looking down at her says, "No, my dearest, you are alive and as beautiful as the moon." So we see these material examples of Palestinian men and Palestinian boys demonstrating compassion, love, kindness, communal community and protection, and this is the reality of Palestinian men and boys. It's not what the Western media has constructed and manufactured to enable this constant and ongoing violence. So this multifaceted dehumanization justifies the West in the surveillance, maiming, and slaughter of brown men and boys. So first, we want to explore surveillance, which is certainly pervasive here in the United States as well. But in particular in Israel, they have something called the Red Wolf program, which is a facial recognition technology used to track Palestinians in Hebron in the West Bank. And we have examples of, Palestinians who have become, very popular in the news with Motaz and Refat al-Arir, which point to or suggest that this surveillance is also being used in Gaza. In the video here with Motaz, he says that he's going to buy his grandmother some water, and then they airstrike the building right beside him. And Motaz has been one of the most outspoken and vocal Palestinian journalists, at least for the English speaking population. And Refat al-Arir, who was martyred in December, had received an anonymous phone call from presumably the IOF that knew the exact school in which he was sheltering. So he decided to leave this school shelter and go to his sister's apartment, and then his sister's apartment was subsequently airstruck and killing him and his entire family. So this kind of tracking, this Israeli surveillance, plays into the panopticon theory, which is the setup of a prison in which the prison guard can see every single movement of every single prisoner. So not only is the infrastructure in place for this surveillance to happen all the time, but even if the infrastructure is not perfect, and Palestinian boys and men feel that they get the sense that they're being watched all the time, and it's a violation of their basic human right to privacy. So we can also see an instance of surveillance in 2007 where over 50% of Palestinian boys experienced body searches compared to 9% of Palestinian girls. So it is not that there is an imminent danger with surveillance, but it is the potential of being an attacker that damns brown men to this perpetual suspicion. They have to be watched all the time because they have the potential to be dangerous. It is not even that they are already dangerous, committing violence. It's that they have this potential to be dangerous that necessitates this surveillance.
Okay. Abduction and detention. So we are all aware about the mass hostages in Israeli IOF prisons. And this is done, of course, when there's no crime committed. It is used as another extension of the panopticon theory of, at any moment you could be abducted, and they can say whatever they want. There are many times where they have forged evidence, or the person who submitted this evidence is nowhere to be found, as well as they are tried in military courts. So whenever they are arrested, most of the time they are convicted. Now, under this abduction and detention, they are obviously tortured in the most heinous ways, having their body parts stolen from them, being increasingly traumatized every day under probably horrible, horrible conditions, as we see with Farouk Khatib from Ramallah, who was just released in December 20th, 2023. And just from 6 months of captivity inside the detention centers, he has basically lost most of his body weight, and is obviously traumatized. And it is just a way for the IOF and the oppressors to continue to break the spirit of Palestinian resistance in the brown man, in the people around him, especially in their families, and to outsiders as well, because no matter what, there is like no way to be able to kind of counter these accusations that are labeled against them, especially when the state is manufactured to have them exterminated. So, 3 months, sorry, I didn't read. It was not 3 months, it was 3 months, not 6 months.
And there's also, the abduction and the detention serves as deterrence to resistance. So if you throw a rock at a tank, if you hold up a Palestinian flag, if you make a post on social media saying you support Gaza, you can be abducted and detained, and maybe the next time you'll be less likely to do this small act of resistance. So as Mariam was saying, it's a breaking of the Palestinian spirit, both of the person who is abducted, but then also his family. It causes this family separation, and when he returns, or if he returns from imprisonment, his family may not even be there. So it's all this psychological tactic to deter resistance.
Okay. Maiming and physical violence. Now, a lot of the maiming of Palestinian men is very targeted and intentional. A lot of the times, IOF soldiers will shoot at the legs of Palestinian men and women as they are like escaping bombs or just living in their daily lives. Like, there are videos and portrayals of IOF soldiers shooting Palestinian boys in the legs through metal fences where they haven't proven to be no harm because they're behind the fence. But this is a deliberate strategy in order to kind of like disrupt and destroy the kind of, foundations these men have built for their families under like intense occupation. A lot of these men are disabled and they cannot provide for their families, and they don't have the infrastructure around them to be provided for or to assist them in going back and trying to see if they can gain some employment in order to provide for their families. And not only that, their children are being disabled by IOF soldiers. There are so many just amputees coming out of Gaza right now, and these kids had dreams of becoming football players and like Olympians and like pilots. And so this is an active way to destroy the dreams of Palestinians and the livelihoods and the hopes, and to just make it as hostile of an environment to Palestinian men in particular as possible, especially when it comes to having to rely on the generosity, if there is any, of the Israeli state to be able to seek treatment for the violence committed by the same state.
Yeah, so we can see the worst or the most egregious example of this maiming in the Great March of Return in 2018 and 2019, in which IOF soldiers were ordered to shoot at the legs. So it wasn't an attempt to kill them, it was to maim them, to disable them, and to remove them from public life. As Mariam was describing, in Gaza in particular, there's like a medical visa that Palestinians have to apply to get treatment in Israel or in another country. And as the years have gone on, Israel has granted less and less of these medical visas. So with that infrastructure to support disabilities not even in place, none of these amputees will be able to be fitted with prosthetics or even have crutches or wheelchairs or things like that. So this is just a total removal from their livelihoods.
Not to mention, it is very hard to heal when you are constantly under stress from the zenene, which is like the drone that they have flying constantly to, as psychological torture for the Palestinians, as well as constant bombing. The amount of stress would obviously complicate the healing process.
You said you weren't in medicine, dude.
Look at me. Really? Oh. All right. Oh, wait. Yeah, so me. Now, as mentioned before, in abduction and detention, a lot of these Palestinian men will face ongoing traumas, particularly sexual assault and sexual trauma delivered to them by Israeli guards, male and female. Particularly in the first image in this slide, it totally removes any blame of the guards who have raped this Palestinian man of any crime doing. It is allegations of sex, not rape, with a Palestinian inmate, not even like naming this inmate or their gender or their age, because they never mention the age. And they are just banned. They're not arrested. They're not even like punished. They're just banned as guards for raping and sexually assaulting Palestinian men in prison. And this is not even the only instance. Of course, there have been actual cases of pedophilia by Israeli guards against for the sexual assault of minors and Palestinian boys. I think one recently was 12 years old. He was reported to be raped by an Israeli guard. And it's and anyone who comes out of these prisons are obviously called prisoners, so instead of hostages, because it also indicates that they have done a wrongdoing, which isn't the case. And it's meant to just, frame it it's their fault for committing a crime. That's why they're in this position, which in reality, it is always falsely accused, or it is they're being detained as an act, detained because they did an act of resistance, as simple as throwing a rock at a tank.
And this is in direct contrast to the narratives that we were exploring earlier, which position white women as needing protection from the predatory brown man. Because here we see examples of IOF soldiers who are female who are sexually violating Palestinian men. So this false idea that women can't enact any kind of violence and that it's only men who commit these acts of violence is simply false, and we see this.
Sexual violence and humiliation. Now, I think it was around December 7th, 2023, and this was in Beit Lahia, right? Correct. This is just the instance in which IOF soldiers rented out. So civilian men in Beit Lahia stripped them of their clothing and forced them to prostrate and kneel, and took footage of them to say that they caught Hamas operatives, and really these were journalists, doctors, 12-year-old boys, young boys, as well as men who were just probably trying to get to a safe place when everything's being bombarded in Gaza. And this kind of goes back to the terrorist aspect. As you saw on the German train, 9,000 terrorists are dead. These are all terrorists, as it is to say that the default of the Palestinian brown man is a terrorist. So we must humiliate them and commit this sexual violence against them so that it is harder for them to integrate back into society, as well as feel comfortable in their own skins, and to be to not feel the anxiety of constantly being seen even more in their daily lives.
And the Western media spent hours upon hours producing this propaganda about evil brown hordes brutalizing white women, only for material photographic evidence to emerge where the IOF does exactly that to Palestinian men and boys. So this Orientalist narrative that brown men require taming, here they're literally herded like cattle. It manufactures consent for their total extinction. So here we want to talk about a little bit about pinkwashing and violence against queer brown men. I'm not going to read the full excerpt here, but I'll just describe it briefly, in which two Israeli snipers are witnessing two Palestinian fighters, like guerrilla soldiers, having sex with each other. And one of the Israeli snipers says, "Oh, look what I'm going to do." And he shoots the passive partner in the head, killing him instantly. So here we explore kind of the idea of a perverse sexuality and the sexuality of a so-called terrorist, in that so basically queerness is produced as this Western idea, when we know that queerness in Swana and South Asian countries predates colonialism. But at least in the last 2 decades in the United States, queerness has been assimilated into the folds of American society. This concept is by Jasbir Puar, and it's called homonationalism. And it produces some homosexuals as American, which brings all of the American exceptionalism ethos, like liberal, progressive, and free and liberated, while ostracizing queers of color. It equates queerness with whiteness, and queerness in people of color is then deemed pathological. But the sexuality and gender of any brown man is automatically pathological because of white supremacy. We can see this in our earlier discussions on hypermasculinity and hypersexuality, in which the brown man has this perverted and pathological sexuality. So here, with the Israeli sniper shooting the passive partner, we can see how this emasculation, so the so-called more feminine partner is the one who is killed because he does not have normative sexuality. He's not penetrating the other man. And finally, we want to discuss the murdering and martyring of Palestinian men and boys. All of this violence and surveillance and psychological torture is all in service of ultimately eliminating the population in Gaza and in Palestine. This excerpt from Rashid Khalidi's The 100 Years' War on Palestine said that during the 1936 Arab Revolt, 10% of the adult male population was killed, wounded, imprisoned, or exiled. And these numbers, we have to not become desensitized to these numbers and these percentages. It's hard to wrap our heads around, but putting it in the context of the United States, which has a population of, I think, like 334
million,
yeah.
And like about half of them identify as male. So it's like roughly 150 million, 100 and like 65 million, and like 10% of that is 16.5 million
So
dead.
like just imagine like 16 million American men and boys just like subjected to this same killing and wounding and imprisonment. Like it's an unfathomable number. So ultimately all of this violence is to eliminate the brown men and eliminate this population. So if the brown man is always deemed dangerous and always deemed unsalvageable, what are instances in which brown man is granted sympathy? Well, he must be exceptional and isolated. And here we have a photo of Muhammad al-Kurd, and he talks a lot about his ability to speak English as granting him this kind of exceptional status that sets him apart from his other Palestinian counterparts. But there are many other examples of what makes the brown man exceptional and therefore deserving of humanity. And it also makes this exceptional brown man distinct from his group, which is assumed to be perverse and dangerous. So we mentioned ability to speak English. There's also American citizenship and general adoption of American or Western values or ways of life. And we see often in media with Muslim men or Muslims in general, they are Muslim, but they're not too Muslim. Like they drink or they do drugs or they have sex, and they don't follow those, those oppressive backwards customs to become more acceptable to Western society.
One of the good ones,
Yes.
oh, he's one of the good ones. You're not like the other Muslim people. It's more of a separate them and cut them off from the culture. So the only thing that's different about them is their skin color, which they can't avoid.
Yeah. And we also resist the production of queer brown people as homonormative in discussions of homonationalism, as absorbable into American society, when that very same queerness produces them as exceptional, but it also produces their communities as terrorists. So we discussed the sexuality of the terrorist and how the brown man has this this perverse or pathological sexuality. Well, we don't want to exceptionalize queer brown people as, well, this is truly the American dream. Like we have a queer brown person in America. We reject that exceptionalism. So another means of this granting of conditional humanity is through sexual objectification and fetishization. So this has been making the rounds the last few days regarding this Houthi Yemeni freedom fighter who has just been posting on TikTok and on Twitter, and he has been completely inundated with comments about how handsome he is, how people want to marry him, and they want to have his babies, and it's just completely deranged.
Using crude sexual suggestions and his direct messages. He's 19, so.
Yeah, and we invoke this quote by Muhammad al-Kurd. I want to investigate why I'm sometimes given the mic. Is it because I'm easy on the eyes? Is it because I speak with an American accent? Maybe. So this is the only language with which we can understand brown men's pain through attractiveness. Does their sexual availability to the West or to the colonizer grant them this conditional humanity? Earlier we discussed the panopticon through the lens of a sniper, through the lens of physical violence and surveillance. But there also exists the colonial gaze, in which the colonized must offer up some part of them to the colonizer. And in this case, it is sexual desire of the colonizer, the urge to conquer the body itself.
brown men are either a tool to be used to promote violence against them or an object to be consumed, but never human, to the Western Hemisphere.
But as we saw earlier with the examples of brown men rescuing kids out of the rubble, helping animals and healing and caring for the wounded and for children, it is actually Muslim brown masculinity that saves brown men from their demise. And I want to read aloud this excellent quote from the Palestinian Feminist Collective that reads, "Palestinian men are our friends, our comrades in struggle, our teachers and protectors, our spiritual guides and healers, and we love them. They are suffering the injury of this ongoing Nakba, physically, spiritually, and emotionally alongside us, and we love them. They are navigating grief, trauma, and pain, and we love them. They are practicing defiance, resistance, and steadfastness, and we love them. They are freedom fighters, and we love them. They are full beings with contradictions, and we love them." So I felt that that was such a beautiful quote that encapsulates so much of what we talked about, in that, do men need to pass some sort of moral ethics test to be deserving of rights and of life? We reject that idea of holding them up to some sort of Western morality or any kind of morality for them to be deserving of humanity. We also reject the idea of gender exceptionalism, in which the West deploys an almost missionary discourse to rescue Muslim women from their oppressive male counterparts. And we reject the false gender binary that places women as good and men as bad, because men can do bad and good just like how women can do bad and good. There's no dichotomy between that. We also want to acknowledge that that masculinity and the patriarchy has been used in all cultures to subjugate women and other marginalized genders. We highlight the plight of brown men, as they are often excluded from these discussions of colonial violence, but it's not that colonized men are the only people to face this violence. Palestinian women, Palestinian children of all genders are also subject to colonial violence, and here we wanted to simply highlight the plight of Palestinian men because they're often left out of these discussions. As we mentioned, the framework of women and children. So women and children are discussed mournfully in the deaths and the maiming, but not Palestinian men or brown men. I also want to read this quote from Lara Shihai from her book Psychoanalysis Under Occupation, in which she says, "Rather than only considering masculinity, we locate the ways in which Israeli settler violence targets Palestinian masculinity, namely through targeting the roles of father, son, and or brother, but always in relation to mothers, daughters, sisters, and siblings." So Israeli settler violence targets Palestinian and brown masculinity as an attempt to disrupt the familial structure of the Palestinian family. So it's always in relation to these other marginalized genders that masculinity is being targeted, or Palestinian men are being targeted by settler violence. And now we're going to play a video.
ربنا يرحمهم. بفتخر بخواتي وامي شهداء ربنا يرحمهم، لكن اقسم بالله العلي العظيم يا نتنياهو خلف آلاء الشهداء 3 من الأبناء سيفجرون رأسك يا ابن الكلب. ربنا يرحمهم شهداءنا. نحن أبطال. نحن غزة. أين أنت ودول العربية؟ حماك الله يا غزة. علمت كل دول العالم الرجولة. هالقد هيك دايرة العالم كله مش قدر لها. صرنا أبطال. أم شهيدة ربنا يرحمها. خواتي شهداء ربنا يرحمهم. لكن لحد نعادل أيام وتصور أنت وانا داس على رقابهم هيك شو زي ما داسوا في 7 أكتوبر لما حكوا جنود الاحتلال غنائم. ربنا يرحمك يما واحنا ثابتين و100 زي نتنياهو بده يجي. مين هذا بايدن نتنياهو مشكلة بينه. يا ريت يا شولي يا ريت. أنا واعي والله أنا فيش فيا حاجة أضحك ها.
الله يرحمهم الله يرحمهم.
فيش فيا حاجة عادي والله العظيم عادي ها.
So the quote that we wanted to highlight from that clip is, "You taught the whole world manhood." You know, the whole world stands against Gaza, and yet we still stand undefeated. So what are the ways in which masculinity or brown masculinity serve to proliferate life and continue resistance? Masculinity is not wholly toxic. There are instances of masculinity that protect the population, that enable this steadfastness and this resistance. And in this tragic moment with this boy whose mother and sisters were all killed in an airstrike, it is his masculinity that gets him to stand up and curse the Israeli and American war machines that have subjected him to this violence. And here we have some of the readings that we consulted as we were working on this. I also have some of them up here. We also want to add to look to Palestinian and brown men, particularly in poetry, as a means to humanize them. Darwish, Kanafani, and of course Muhammad al-Kurd, who, wallah, I've quoted this man so many times during this presentation. But these are all ways that we can continue to interface with Palestinian literature and particularly with brown masculinity.
Yes. Also, don't even stop at poetry. Go into this many documentaries and movies made by Palestinian men. Like 5 Broken Cameras is a great one, especially when it really shows the relationship between a Palestinian father and his son, and his wanting to record these moments in his life, but his camera keeps getting broken by the Israeli occupation, and a new camera has to be bought and record. But it just really shows that to be a Palestinian man is to keep going when the West constantly demonizes you and tells you that you are animals and savages and barbaric and that you're conservative, and then at the same time fetishize you and objectify you, and all you just want to be is human. So you take great care to record every single moment that shows that you are human.
So that concludes our presentation. Thank you. We also have time for questions, so if we have any questions, there's going to be a mic that I will go get.
Or you can scream it out, it's okay.
So I'm going to walk around right with the mic. Okay, I wanted to say this was a resoundingly comprehensive, rooted in academia, well-cited, well-constructed, well-thought out, really based in the humanities. And I think if y'all wrote a paper, not even a paper, a book of essays, this would eat on JSTOR. I really, really mean that. And I'm gonna be the mic person, so please, I think we should pay homage to this wonderful talk and really, try to have a robust discussion, because I think there's so many things. I honestly don't think a talk like this has been done. I mean, writing masculinities is something that, in the Americas and Europe, who is it? Simone de Beauvoir wrote about, I think she was one of the first academics that paid attention to kind of humanized patriarchy, but it was limited to the white man, right? So y'all are doing something that I personally don't think has ever been done before. So I think that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say was, in an effort in our discussion, and this is like the discussion point I wanted to propose, the narratives and the imagery and the work the journalists are doing in Gaza, I think, really challenge every single trope that was proposed here. And there's there's so much here, but just to start us off, I was really moved by the West and specifically Israel, but the West is really confused about how to, on one end, hyper-masculinize the men of Gaza, because then we have to defeat them. It's a war. But then they also want to, going back to if Edward Said was here, he would be really proud. Also, the chameleon, right?
Total honor.
Also, they're desperately trying to make them feminine, because if they can do that, then the morale of the IOF is raised and they're able to wage this war. But we know that they're not winning on the grounds. So I just wanted to propose, I often think about why Motas Azeza has the most followers, 18 million, I think, recently. Yes. And I think it's because he exceptionally does the masculinization well, but he also has this resoundingly soft side that really appeals to everyone. I don't know if y'all saw last week. He says, what do you want us to do? And the bombs are going off, and he's doing this little dance, right? So dancing, effeminate. So I think that's one thing where I think that highlights his appeal, that he does both, and I think he embodies that dichotomy. I also think what the Western media is trying to do, and I think this goes back to what you proposed about white women, their innocence, and just how they wear patriarchy as a coat, kind of like what that really disgusting news anchor did, and how they allow it really in first and second wave feminism lenses. But the fact that Hind and Bisan and Plestia don't wear the hijab, so in an effort, the Western media is trying to masculinize them and de-effeminatize them, if that's a word. Yeah. So anyway, those are 2 points that I think really to pay homage to our journalists, and really they're doing something that's so radical, never been done before, and they're really challenging every single one of these tropes. So yeah, if anybody wants to follow up and comment, bring the mic to you.
Thank you so much. I totally resonate with everything you said.
This was really, really amazing.
Thank you.
You must have did a great job. Y'all understand everything now.
Oh, there's a hand.
Oh, perfect.
Thank you. Louder than I thought. Hi. So I just wanted to basically say that I find it kind of a refreshing kind of perspective to hear about just the topic itself of masculinity, because I just feel that it's just such a thing to just feel apprehensive about, just to even so much as say, given times, especially modern times now. And it just feels a little bit refreshing that basically when it comes to speaking of it as a concept, that it's basically, it feels good to just have it be open to discussion and to be put it just in a positive kind of light in any way, shape, or form, especially given that it's not putting it positive in a way that has to attack or undermine another side, because it always seems for me to feels like if one side is talked up, well, the other side has to be talked down, when it doesn't have to be that way. Like, it doesn't have to be that, well, one is good, so therefore the other has to be bad, especially given on a female perspective as well, which I feel is something that doesn't really get touched up on, because, well, you would assume a man would have to defend it. So it just feels good to me that basically when it comes to times now, especially when feminism and an ideal is at all-time high, that it just feels good to know that masculinity can be seen as something not only as a positive, but as something as respective. And it feels good to know that it doesn't have to come at the cost of another view, and that at the end of the day, the same way that femininity is something, of course, to be admired and respected, that we could also do the same thing when it comes to masculinity. And it doesn't have to be about picking sides or picking one over the other, but basically, at the end of the day, the same way that it is with feminism, that masculinity by itself is just about equality and not so much just about looking at one side, but looking at it from both sides of us. So I just want to say that it was really nice to actually hear that aloud and to be put forth in such a positive light, when it's usually not a popular thing to even say it all, when of course just patriarchy by itself is already basically almost like a boogeyman that you have to look out for. So I just want to say again that it felt good to just hear that out loud, you know, just even be spoken aloud out now, when it's not the easiest thing to discuss at all privately, let alone it could be even publicly. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, we definitely recognize our positionality. You know, we are marginalized genders, and as we were working on this, both Mariam and I were like, should we be giving this presentation? Like, I'm not a brown man, but at the same time, I'm like the most annoying brown man on the planet. So yeah, I definitely resonate with what does masculinity look like when it's not all toxic, and what are forms of masculinity that are empowering, that proliferate life and resistance. And you know, just from that video of the boy saying, we showed the whole world manhood, him surviving and saying that Gaza will be free, that is masculinity. Maybe it isn't to the West, because the West deploys masculinity to subjugate colonized peoples, male and female and all other genders, but that is masculinity to that Palestinian boy.
Also, the West sees masculinity as in the context of its highly individualistic society that it has built it in. Like, the most masculine man is the one who can do everything by himself. He's so tough. He can beat up an army with just his two fists.
And
no
he's
need
the
for help.
breadwinner too.
And, oh yeah, and he's the breadwinner too. But in the masculinity in, as like experience from my experience as an Egyptian, it is the Middle East and North Africa are very communal societies. They go and visit each other, and it is very important to have these male friendships with each other in the older brown men sphere. And like you'll see them embracing each other, holding hands, and like laughing together and just experiencing joy together. And to them, that's what peak masculinity is like being there for your community, being a protector of your community, but also embracing your community as it is to be a brown man.
Any other questions?
Thank you. I'm going to see if I can word this correctly. First of all, thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation and was displayed very eloquently. As you guys clearly have so much information and so much beautiful knowledge, and you expressed recognizing when sometimes it's not worth your energy or time to try to help someone understand some of the things that you've been able to recognize and learn from. How have you drawn those lines with trying to recognize groups of people who could use this information or your knowledge most, and how closely those may be to someone who there's no hope, it's not worth your time and energy, it's against your self-preservation to try to educate them when they don't want to be, yet those populations are so close to people who maybe need it most or who are so foregone. So just in your experience as someone who is so knowledgeable and is able to speak so well about it, how have you been able to detect what is a good population to kind of pour or focus on to try to educate? And then where do you draw those lines?
Anyone who's willing to question something, to have the curiosity to find out. Because often when we learn more about things, we are kind of threatened by them at the same time, especially if you have deep set beliefs or you're raised in a society that has ingrained in you, like, you know, that like these things that you are seeing are wrong or they're bad, you know. It's just been propagandized again and again and again. And those who are willing to see and ask and ponder about it are those who we kind of look to educate if they are willing to be educated or if they ask to be educated on it. Those who are too far gone usually are, I guess the best way to say it is that they're too comfortable and they don't want to be disturbed in their comfort, because knowledge is like a heavy burden to bear. You know, there's a saying that, you know, like I think it was by James Baldwin, is to be black is to be angry all the time, you know, because you learn more and more about the atrocities that were committed against you and how you're held down by society. So a lot of people don't want to reckon with that. And a lot of, like, you know, white people don't want to reckon with the fact that, you know, they have privilege as well, or they also may have ancestors that may have oppressed. You know, it's a hard thing to reckon with. But, you know, those who have the bravery to come forward and ask are those that we always kind of strive to, you know, educate and share our knowledge with.
I think another way of kind of like extending an olive branch, yeah, olive, okay, but is to see basically like, do you have rapport with this person? Like, do you have some sort of relationship with this person that allows you kind of spaces of vulnerability? Because you know, random guy on Twitter who's like has 10 digits after his name, I don't think that guy is going to change his opinion. But if your coworker says something a little off, or then, you know, you can, in a non-judgmental way, ask like, oh, what makes you say that? And explore it, you know, with an open-ended question. And that can open the way for these conversations to occur. It's meeting a person who perhaps has less knowledge on the topic, meeting them with curiosity and with that same vulnerability. Yeah, I think, and I do think that these conversations are best had in person, and if not in person, like over DMs. Like, it has to be somebody who you already have some sort of established relationship with. It can't just be like a stranger. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing the burden of your knowledge.
Hi. Oh, wow, this is loud. I guess I wanted to start off with that was a really brilliant presentation. It's very, I think you're very empathetic, of course, for your situation, but one of the things that I was really caught off was the idea of when does a child, particularly a Palestinian child, cease to be a child, especially in the terms of boys. You know, you have these very young boys, the child that was unfortunately murdered months ago within America. He was about 6, I think.
Yeah, Wadia al-Fayoum.
And it is a question, especially with media, of when does this boy cease to be a boy? What age do you look at a child and decide that is no longer a child, that is a potential threat, especially in regards to how the West sees it? Because we do that a lot, where we look at people of color and children of color, and especially in black populations, where children, girls, boys, they cease to be children as young as babies, as 2-year-olds, and I just thought that you really attacked that issue very well, and I guess my question is, how do you go through a presentation like this, researching, and I guess not let your emotional side get to it, because you are going through these very real, very recent. This is not like something that is distant to you. How do you handle that research while being concise and in control of your emotions and not let them cloud your judgment?
Yeah, I mean, I think about that too. If I have all of the solutions, I'd be out of a job as a doctor. But I think one means of going about exploring this is to also just like ground yourself and take breaks. One of my favorite books up here is Terrorist Assemblages by Jasbir Puar, which examines Orientalism and queer theory and those intersections. And she's quoted a lot throughout this presentation. And at some point, like I think it was the Abu Ghraib chapter, I just could not stand it anymore, and I just put the book down, and I was like, okay, like no more. And then you return to it the next day, kind of refreshened and more emotionally regulated. And I think another aspect that motivates me to continue reading and understanding is kind of what we described earlier about examining the frameworks. Like if we understand the schema of Western society, so what the West sees as a good person and a bad person in the most simplest terms, then we can better challenge those narratives. There's Vijay Prashad, who's an academic. He says, the more you read and the more you organize, you fight better. So I think that motivation as well to fight better is something that keeps me going and reading, despite these topics being so personal, like the topics of surveillance and deportation and objectification. These have happened to my loved ones. These have happened to my family members. But understanding that psychology is something that pushes me to keep going. Mariam, if you want to.
Yeah, it is very hard because a lot of these people that I see and described and have atrocities happen to them look like my own family. It's like staring at people who look like, people I've known my whole life, people I've seen in my community, and a lot of people affected are of my community. I am actually not from New York. I've been deceiving you this whole entire time. I'm actually from Houston. But yeah, so I know so many people in my community that have lost tens of their family members. And it's difficult because it's so close to home. So many of the martyrs share my name. So it really, what I find helps is talking with other people who also feel the same pain, because it is hard. And I'm not even Palestinian, I'm Egyptian, but it's still painful to see, as anyone with a conscience can see, that this is horrible. There are, like, you know, every day you kind of try not to tear up in public. There's several times during this presentation I wanted to tear up, and not because of my anxiety. But it's just like, you know, you have to kind of pause and take a breath and, you know, be able to push onward despite these mass emotions, because it's important to, you know, continue seeing this, continue viewing these people who are humans, who are documenting themselves, just so that they can be seen for once by the West as human as well, because this has been going on for 75 years. And it has been atrocity upon atrocity, and a lot of us are just waking up. So, you know, it's not about my feelings or what I feel. It's about, you know, how can we best serve to educate more, to unravel what the West has told us for the past, like, since, like, actually 1921, but, like, but yeah, like, for, like, hundreds of years at this point.
All right, thank you.
Sorry. I just wanted to say this entire presentation was just a breath of fresh air, honestly. And often in online communities, when Palestinian men are mentioned, or just Palestinians in general, it's usually followed up with a kind of gut reaction to prove that these men are human and prove that Palestinians are human, which I really do appreciate that this did not happen in this presentation, and it was really great to see. Especially as a Palestinian, like, I often have to prove myself to other people, like, I deserve sympathy, my family deserves sympathy, and it's really tiring. So I'm just really glad that this conversation did not, we'll only cover the masculinity of Palestinian men and not try to be like, hey, Palestinian men are human too, as people on Twitter often do, and it's really annoying. But yeah, I just wanted to say this was a really great presentation and desperately needed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to read from my notes so that hopefully I can string all my thoughts together. I want to start by thanking both of you so much for this knowledge share and for bringing us together in community tonight. I think a lot about manufactured consent, both since October 7th and for the past 100 years. I also think about white feminism and hyper-individualist wellness and how it keeps Western masses complacent in the brutalization and perpetuation of violent stereotypes against brown men. As our lovely Mike person said earlier, there's so much raw material coming out of Gaza that renders those stereotypes null. We can clearly see how media plays such a huge role in robbing Arabs of both joy and humanity, which continues to exist even in suffering, which as an Arab American I've experienced and witnessed my entire life. And as we hear Palestinians asking us to speak and use our voices, we also see white feminism act, whether through pinkwashing. I think in the tweet that was brought up earlier, the tweeter kind of invokes Western feminists accusing brown men of sexual assault and rape by ending the tweet with, and the feminists of the world are silent. Or we also see the wellness industry here in the West, encouraging folks to turn a blind eye to the news. All of that lovely raw footage that we're seeing that would nullify these stereotypes. Turning a blind eye to those in the name of wellness rather than encouraging navigation through that material both in and with community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we're doing
Closing
pretty well.
remarks?
Well, thank you so much for joining us. As you mentioned, it's a labor of grief and pain, but it was also a labor of love. Thank you for joining us here to talk about this and explore this together. Yeah, I'm blown away that it's not just my friends who came to this presentation. Like, I was like, okay, I have 2 people coming, like, let's go.
We were going to be really happy if
Yes.
just 10 people came. We were going to be really happy.
Yeah, like I think at some point in the presentation we were like, you know, this is actually for us. Like, this is, this is being recorded, and I think it can serve as a foundation for exploring this further, and also just archiving these contradictions between what the West tells us is a brown man versus what we see through the raw footage, through that material reality. So I think, we made the presentation for us, but we're really glad to share it with you all. Yeah, thank you so much for showing up.
It's not just a foundation, it's a full body of work that stands on its own seriously.
Oh, wow,
I
thank
think
you.
everybody kind of echoed.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Also, we have stickers up here. They're made by Shazleen.